Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my absolute honor and privilege to welcome you here at our home of ACB for this great day, an event celebrating women, hosted by the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. By introduction, my name is Tato Radise. I am the Communications and Reputation Manager at the Corporate Affairs Division at ACB. I would like to firstly welcome our esteemed guests, our Honorable President, Mr. Thabo Mbeki, who is joining us online, as well as Mam Zanele Mbeki. Thank you for gracing us with your virtual presence, and we're delighted to have you join us today. I would also like to recognize our beautiful Program Director for the day, Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Muleketi, our panelists, our partners, and sponsors of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. In absentia, I would like to recognize our CEO, Richard Rivett-Connick, our Vice President of Corporate Affairs, Zole Kalisa. Unfortunately, they couldn't join us today due to a prior commitment with our Global CEO, Michelle Ducares in Mexico. We're also pleased to have you here, our guests, and the guests that are joining us online. To kick off the event, I'd like to share some inspiration with you from a quote I recently read. It reads as follows: "The world needs strong women who will lift and build others up, who will love and be loved, women who live life bravely, both tender and fierce, women of steadfast will." So to all the women in the audience today, let's live bravely today and every day. Please enjoy your stay with us today, and may you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's give another round of applause to Tato. And I'd also like to just take this moment to thank Ambev for the opportunity for us to join you today. There's quite a few people whom I should acknowledge, but I don't want to run the risk of leaving out the most important people. And those are all the school kids who are sitting here in the audience. I think we should give you the first round of applause. So I'd like to join Tato in acknowledging the indomitable Mam Zanele, who's really the lifeblood to International Women's Day with the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, and her drive that has pushed us and ensured that we will have nothing short of excellence when and as required. But secondly, I want to acknowledge and recognize the President, who is online and following these deliberations today as well. Both of them have sent messages, and I'm not going to read these now. I will come back to that later. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for engaging with a subject area where we, as Africans, look at how best we can and will deal with the effects of climate change and ensure that women who bear the brunt of what's been termed the perfect storm, with shortages of food, fuel, fertilizer, scarring effects from the COVID-19 pandemic, soaring inflation, rising debt, and extreme weather, women and the countries on this continent are feeling these challenges. And whilst various other issues also need urgent attention, perhaps none is more pressing than addressing food insecurity to maintain the nutritional needs of Africa's 1 billion people and to protect our human development. According to the 2022 Global Report on Food Crises, their mid-year update, at least 1 in every 5 Africans go to bed hungry. And an estimated 140 million people in Africa face acute food insecurity. The Horn of Africa continues to experience persistent drought, and countries that depend on countries like Russia and Ukraine for wheat and sunflower oil imports have seen prices increase to a point that they are out of reach for ordinary people. The Thabo Mbeki Foundation, of which I am the chair, was established to develop programs and to work collaboratively with like-minded organizations and individuals committed to the renewal of Africa. And to that end, I'd want to acknowledge someone who's online virtually with us today, and that's Mum Brigalia Bam. She was the first chairperson. So when people talk about standing on the shoulders of those who have come before us, you can see there's a solid number of shoulders that I've stood upon. And mind you, I'm not the youngest in the room, so just to make that clear. So this is what we've been established to develop. And therefore, as a response to the food security challenge, the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, as part of our International Women's Day celebration, we're hosting this dialogue on how the utilization of technology and innovation can assist in ensuring food security and find solutions to enhance food production. And we do this with a formidable partner, and that's the University of South Africa. And you will hear the Vice-Chancellor when she speaks at a later point. But in addition to this, we thought that this year we'd invite Dr. Wajiru Kamau-Rutenberg, who's an expert in agricultural research and development, to give our keynote address. We thought that we'd show the intergenerational mix in action, because, you know, if I'm standing on the shoulders of those who have come before us, there's a couple of others standing on my shoulders, and next to me would be someone like Bongiwe Njobe, who's also a little younger than me, but we thought we'd get someone who's slightly younger than us, or maybe a lot more, to actually prove that there is a number of young women who are coming through. And to that end, I do want to say that the first time I met Wajiru, and that was forever and a day, Wajiru, hey? You were very much involved in the African Women's Agricultural Research and Development Network. She was the director of that, but I'm not going into the CV right now. I don't think it's that part of the program yet. I will be coming back to that. But safe to say that we will also be hosting 2 panel discussions, and the purpose of that is to interrogate the utilization of technology and innovation by women to ensure food security and to find solutions to enhance food production. There's been an increase in technology-mediated agriculture and farming methods such as hydroponics, vertical farming, rooftop farming, and the use of drones in agro production. And there's actually some women in North Africa, Tunisia to be specific, who's done some excellent work on the use of drones to ensure increased agricultural productivity, production and all. And we'll hear some of these as we go along. Now, all these have contributed to enormous gains. However, despite these giant strides, women who produce between 60 to 80% of the food are not quite at the forefront as we'd like to see them. In many instances, they've been left behind. And we're also deeply conscious that many women have little understanding of the intellectual property rights in many spheres, such as agriculture, tourism, and traditional knowledge systems, amongst others. Lack of access to technology, finance, land ownership, the whole issue of property rights and seeds, for instance, have exacerbated the inequality and discrimination against women. This gender-based conundrum has seen several solutions, including capacity building for rural women, but we still want to see impact, and we demand scale. We need this in order to ensure that we yield more results. So it's against this background that the theme women, technology, innovation, and food security raises fundamental questions regarding the role played by women in food security and the obstacles women face in food security. And ours today is not to have a pity party around the obstacles, but it's to actually engage and find the solutions. And that's why we see today's event as part of a year-long activities to take this forward. So watch this space. And when I look at some people who are in the audience here today, and the people who I'm aware that are online, I'm assured that this is definitely going to happen. We will take this forward. During the event as well, we will touch briefly on the Women's Development Center that will form part of the Thabo Mbeki Presidential Library. You heard the younger people, along with the President, speak earlier about the library and the fact that it's intended to be a living library and museum. And we're all going to be part of that. None of us are bystanders. So that will be considered because it will narrate the story of Africa through and beyond African leaders' work and impact within the larger context of African liberation and development. We envisage the Women's Development Center will be a place for understanding women's development on the continent. We believe that by working together and leveraging the power of innovation and technology, we can overcome the challenges facing African agriculture and achieve lasting food security on the continent. This event is an opportunity to engage in dialogue, share ideas and best practice, and develop solutions that will help empower women and achieve food security in Africa. So to all of you today, in the room and online, thank you once again for joining us we really look forward to the outcome of this meeting and for what we anticipate will be a year that will make a difference in this larger discourse. And hence we have the engagement of academia, the private sector. We have representatives here from government as well. And we have the future generations in their uniforms with absolute pride, because you're going to make sure that we are true to what we commit today. And it's also an opportunity to you to ask questions. And remember, there's never a question too big. That's why Wajiru and others are here. And neither is there a question too small. I would then want at this point, I think there's a short clip that could be shown at this particular point in time as we get the Vice-Chancellor to come in and welcome us. And this is the library. Thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to call my sister, the Vice-Chancellor of UNISA, to come up and join me at the podium to welcome us all.
Good afternoon. Dumelang, Absheni, Mulweni, Assalamu alaikum, Shalom. I thought following the very great introductory remarks that have been shared with us, the pearls of wisdom from the chair of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, who's also the Chancellor of Nelson Mandela University, it would be great to greet you. We understand that greetings in African philosophy are around centering our being as we interact with the universe in the reclamation of Africa's intellectual histories. We see the imperative of this nexus of humanity and the universe as important arena for our reflections around the future. If you look at the banner today, you'll realize that UNISA is celebrating 150 years of being an inventor of open distance education in the world, not just in South Africa. As such, events such as this are an invitation to look at what you had stated, Program Director, Mayor Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, when you said we stand on the shoulders of pathfinders, innovators, and creators that have contributed to our reimagination of the future in those areas, the grand challenges and opportunities that invite knowledge horizons to being partners in the changes that society require. But before I share my welcome remarks, I'd like to ensure that I don't forget my table of precedence, lest I fail in that assignment. Let me recognize yourself, Ms. Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, the chairperson of Thabo Mbeki Foundation, Dr. Wajiru Kamau-Rutenberg, our eminent keynote address speaker here today, and the winner of numerous awards. I want to congratulate you on all these awards that demonstrate the intellectual capability, but commitments of African women. I also recognize Marion Amy Dietrich, Director of the Global Challenges Division, OMPI, the Ms. Mangele Nkosi, General Manager and Country Lead for SA Cisco, Ms. Blessing Mawire, who is also from the TM Empowerment Center, Ms. Barbara, I want to apologize. How do we say it? Yes, Kopelovici. I was wondering whether it's, so I did not want to butcher it. From the Entrepreneurship Director of South African Breweries, members of the Presidential Library present here today, members of our panel discussion participating in this program today, Ms. Naledi Muleo, Elizabeth Mkandawiri, Bongani Njobe, Dr. Malan Nodier, Ms. Martine Solomon, Mr. Stephen Barnard, the Council of the University of South Africa, the esteemed students, academics, and professional and alumni of the university, members of the audience here and the future represented by the students with us. Good afternoon. The University of South Africa is truly appreciative of the relationship that we have with the TM Foundation. It is a flagship relationship that the university has carved, and we're equally appreciative of the work that we do with the TM Foundation. There are multiple projects and processes that are quite central to this partnership. They include, not limited to, the celebrations of International Women's Day as that particular event which we centrally ensure that women, the gender questions, their nexus and intersection with the aspiration of our country in the National Development Plan associated with the global agenda as well as Africa's agenda embodied in Agenda 2063 find resonance. We also have the Presidential Library, the TM School, where a majority of you are invited to register in order to ensure that you continue to learning, relearning, and sometimes undoing the learning. I'm appreciative to say, even as I come today, I come on the hot heels of great news about UNISA's improvements in its academic provisioning. For instance, when I joined in 2021, this particular web metrics rated as a 12 or 13. Just yesterday, we have found that we have skipped 10 spaces in the international arena, and we are now ranked number 10. So there's hope. So there's hope that this partnership has the opportunity of yielding the outcomes that we deem important for transformation of our society, but as well catapulting women. We do so understanding that even as women rise, we should not just be grateful for them overcoming the glass ceiling, but to also cushion and protect them from the wounds that derive from the glass ceiling. This is a topic that we think is important as we enable and empower many women to taking responsibilities in the leadership in multiple environments of society. The 2023 UN Women theme, Digital, or others say it's called Digital. I'll Africanize it and say Digital. Innovation and technology for gender equality is really an important invitation, taking into cognizance the digitalization transformations that are taking place and the invitation for our society not to being in the back burners of these transformations. It is also coming at a time when the questions around peace, around the dignity of humanity, around recalibrating ourselves in the aftermath of COVID-19 become grand questions that we should together engage with. We are here to reflect on the comprehensive contributions, therefore, that women make despite all the challenges or contradictions that they face. We do so understanding that it's to not create other hierarchies, but to ensure that this emancipatory project, this idea of transformation is quite integrated with these aspirations of a society or societies and institutions of learning, and their global impact are resonant. Yearly, as women, we hear multiple challenges that the women and their societies face. Dr. Geraldine Fraser-Muleketi has already stated the grand challenges of food sovereignty or food security, depending on the language that you would like to raise as one of the areas where the faces of poverty of women, their communities, the politics of distribution, access to economy, are horizons of our reflections if we are to invent solutions that will change society for the better. The second aspect that I think is quite important in this reflexivity is not just how we are entwined or the food questions and food sovereignty, for the seeds and food in the African consciousness and the idea of being are often connected as those areas where humanity is not just for its own being, but is inextricably bound with the environment. And it could not be, it is Mbiti who reminds us, therefore, that even the philosophy from Africa that rallies that our economic system, ecological systems, social systems, educational systems must be committed to the transformations of society, that this invitation of us being entwined as humanity must be at the center. And thus, when we undermine the contributions, intellectual, economic, or any other contribution of women, we miss out. Former President Mandela, also the current President of the Republic of South Africa, have reminded us of the imperative of education and of universities in harnessing the imperative for social mobilization and transformation. And it's not just on the economic arena, but it's also on the idea of reclaiming what it means to being human. So what about this theme that the UN has asked us to reflecting on as part of addressing the grand challenges in the digital systems? I'm not going to speak for too long, Chair. I recognize you gave me 15 minutes. I'll try to use only less than. Thank you. Yeah, that's very important. With this, we are overwhelmed with rapid availability of massive amounts of information. We have to find ways to manage big data. We have new ways of communication, new ways of doing business, new ways of e-government, but also, are we using these ways in the benefit of society and all? Who owns the technologies? and who are the inventors? And how do we invest as universities and society and business into technologies that really create the transformations that the patron of the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, the Chancellor of the University of South Africa, invites us to. For us in universities, we've recognized that there are multiple challenges and opportunities that the digital systems create for us. The questions of artificial learning, machine learning, the contestations or even the questions whether our students have written their assignments themselves, the assessment imperatives that we put in place in order to ensure that the quality of the learning is really authentic are questions that we constantly engage with. But for many women, it's not just issues of assessment, issues of proctoring, or even issues of digital access to exchanges in goods and services. Is also, how are these enabling my security, my dignity? If we take into cognizance that cybersecurity has become one of the prized assets that we should be investing in. In terms of gender-based violence, we are also aware of the abuses that are used in technology for stalking, undermining women, and undermining their dignity. How do we resource women and men to look into these security matters to ensure that the dignity of women and men, girls and boys, and those who don't want to be caricatured into any gender is manifest? The double presence of women, both in the labor market and also in the unpaid care work, also raises questions around how do we create technologies that allow women, if they choose to do care work, to still participate economically and be compensated for the work that they do. Finally, how do we create systems, policies, interventions in our state infrastructures and architectures, in business and corporate sector, in the civil society systems on associated matters that promote gender equality, gender parity through knowledge, education, social investments? These are the questions I hope we will deliberate on, and I would like to welcome you to this important deliberative processes around International Women's Day, a partnership between the University of South Africa, the Home for Leaders, the university that is reclaiming the future and reinventing itself in order to becoming a resource to the global knowledge arena as it does to society. I wish you all the best and happy International Women's Day to all the girls and women in this and virtually, but also to the men. If you can share a flower to your daughter, to your partner, to your wife, to your spouse, that is meaningful for us, or a book for us from the university, or a device because it enables them to participating in the digital that we are asked to facilitating. Thank you very much. I appreciate the moment.
Thank you. That was Professor Puleng Lenkabule. She is, as you're well aware, a trained feminist, let me not go back beyond that. But first woman Vice Chancellor in 148 years of UNISA's existence. So thank you for those words and the challenges that you put out. I am now going to call on Blessing Mawire, who leads the content programs and internationalization of the Thabo Mbeki Presidential Library and Center. And she'll have a few minutes to share with us on the content of the Women's Center, as I discussed earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Chair. I would like to ask the tech team to play that video once again so that I can whet your appetite and show you where to go from here. Thank you and good afternoon. I do stand on the shoulders of great giants this afternoon, and I stand on the existing protocol. Welcome to the Thabo Mbeki Presidential Library and Center. When the Ajaya Associates were briefed to design the Thabo Mbeki Presidential Library and Center, they were briefed to design a space dedicated to women's empowerment. As a result, one of those domes that you've just seen was envisioned as the Women's Development Center. The Women's Development Center is a place of understanding the history of African women, the current issues faced by women, and strives to enhance these for the better future of women on the continent. It provides both a physical and virtual spaces for engagement, research, dialogue, exploration, and reflection. The center itself will educate, inspire, and provide a wide spectrum of African women's stories and experiences in a way that appeals to a diverse audience. The Women's Development Center will start running some of these programs ahead of the finalization of the physical building, some of which you've seen just now. This will enable progress in the areas that do not necessarily require dedicated physical spaces. In a reflection of the history of women, it is key to include issues pertaining to activism, culture, education, business, spirituality, public service, agriculture, sports, and science and innovation. These provide a foundation for an understanding of the roles women have led and continue to lead in the development of the African continent. When we talk about what you will get when you come to the Women's Development Center, you will have access to key stakeholders, you will have access to the technology, access to knowledge, the platforms for collaboration and partnerships, as well as an opportunity for you to reflect. So join us and make a difference. Engage with the Thabo Mbeki Foundation, with the Thabo Mbeki Presidential Library and Center, and engage with our programs and help us to understand your industry, your culture, your religion, and your community. Welcome again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Blessing. I heard people talking behind me and saying, that's legacy. You know, and this is what we really want to have as a reality. So Oscar, one of your future columns, you know, no pressure. At this particular point, I would like to invite our keynote speaker. Now, I can't possibly go through her whole resume because you may just think that's the keynote address at the end of the day. So Wajiru Kamau-Rutenberg, in her words, wakes up every day thinking about how to find and support the leaders needed to solve society's hardest problems. She's passionate about unleashing the potential of human capital for social transformation, especially for Africa and its diaspora. So she's involved in a number of initiatives. She's also been involved in a whole range of areas. But I'm not going to unpack that today. I'm going to encourage you to go and read about this after the session. And Wajiru, there's a number of interesting people in this audience, and I can give shout outs to many. But there's one person that I can't resist to call out, and that's someone we refer to as MJ. MJ will reveal herself later, but the reason I'm doing the shout out is just against the backdrop that this is not an event today. It's a year-long program and process, and it's just around our own passion when it comes to the issue of agriculture, nutrition, food security, and so on. So MJ, next year, maybe we sit across the road, no? Thank you. Over to you.
Ooh, I am nervous, I've got to say. Wait, hang on. Allow me to stand on existing protocol with particular recognition for President Mbeki, Mom Zanele, my dear big sister, Dr. Geraldine Fraser, the Vice Chancellor of UNISA, fellow speakers who are going to be enriching our brains, feeding our spirits and making us smarter. The hosts and sponsors of this amazing event, the young women who are making me just smile ear to ear. You are our guests of honor. And all of us distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I greet you. I come with greetings. Now, I don't have a written out speech that I will read. I thought I would take a more conversational approach to this, if that's okay. So that was the most formal part of what I'm going to do today. So I hope that's okay. I'm going to avoid looking at Geraldine just in case I fail the exam. I will only look at her after I'm done speaking. But you will allow me to be in conversation with you. I hope that's okay. And to relax a little bit because I'm really tense also. Let me just give myself permission. That's okay? Yeah. Okay, good, permission. Okay, first, when the national anthem played, and I'm standing next to Geraldine and she's singing the words, it really brought tears to my eyes. I want to engage in conversation with you today as an African, as among fellow Africans, but I'm very cognizant that I'm in South Africa, and South Africa has a particular and special place on this continent. And I think sometimes when you're in a place, you can forget who you are. So allow me to start this conversation by reminding you, South Africans, who you are on this continent and to the rest of us. You hold one of the youngest democracies on this continent. You are a beacon to us. We look to you. Your constitution is one of, if not the most progressive on this planet. Your economy is, I know there's that whole conversation of who has a bigger economy. I don't know, like Nigeria did they redid their math. But that conversation aside, your economy powers the rest of this continent. Your companies here power the rest of the continent in every important way. With great power which you have, comes great responsibility. And so I also want to start this conversation with you, reminding you South Africans of your responsibility to the rest of the continent. This load shedding you're doing, figure yourselves out, please. If you guys start now load shedding, what will the rest of us do? So, just a gentle, like, guys, we're looking. We're watching and we're wondering what's happening. So please figure that one out. We're following you and we need your leadership in this. So, okay. And I was thinking a lot about that, about what's happening in South Africa. And I've had the blessing and the honor of getting to return to South Africa frequently over the last, certainly over the last 7 years. And it really strikes me when you get to a traffic stop and the lights aren't working. And it's the first time I've seen that. And it's striking. And I was thinking about that as I'm thinking about the African Renaissance, which is what I actually want to spend a lot of time talking about today. When Mom Geraldine invited me to give this address, I remembered my time as a young professor almost 20 years ago at the University of San Francisco. I started my job as an assistant professor of political science at the University of San Francisco. And I designed and taught courses on international development, aid and development, power, privilege, and philanthropy, African politics. And one of the things that I knew I wanted to do as a faculty member with these young Californian kids is to challenge their assumptions, what they thought they knew about Africa. And Thabo Mbeki's work and his description of the African Renaissance. Anyone who ever took any class that I ever taught read his work. Not only did I use his writing and his description and aspirations for the African Renaissance to inspire students, his work inspired me and the kind of professor that I was then. And his work also inspired me when it was time to leave California and move back home to be part of the African Renaissance. It got to a point 12 years ago where it was clear to me that I couldn't be part of the African Renaissance from California, and packed up my family, got that husband, put them on planes, and we landed in Nairobi, where we've been based for the last 12 years. And so for me, being able to deliver this address is really coming full circle. These are not just words. And the calling, the invocation of an African Renaissance are not just words. They have been, the search for and working towards an African Renaissance has been a North Star for me in my own career. And so I'm honored to be able to come and speak here. We also know that when we talk about a renaissance, a rebirth, we cannot have a renaissance without innovation. We cannot have a renaissance, a rebirth, without producing new knowledge, without capturing, curating, and passing on new knowledge to our young ones. We cannot have a renaissance without learning to adapt to change. Speakers today have already alluded to the climate crisis that we're facing. When I think about an African Renaissance, there's no African Renaissance that doesn't bring our best and our brightest minds to solve for the climate catastrophe that's coming our way. And here I'm talking about this continent, not even the rest of the planet. When we talk about agriculture and feeding ourselves, it doesn't make any sense to speak about an African Renaissance when we know tonight children will go to sleep without food in their belly. there cannot be a renaissance where we can't figure out for ourselves how to feed ourselves. And so, and I also think about a renaissance not just be, if we're thinking about the renaissance also about being the future, these children who will go hungry tonight, what's happening to their brains? What are we losing in our inability to feed our children? What are we losing in terms of future innovators? What pipeline are we cutting short? Because we're not building what the AFDB president, Akin Adesina, calls the gray matter infrastructure. We can get very good at building roads and bridges. But if we as a continent cannot figure out how to invest in that gray matter infrastructure, and that investment happens in the first 5 years of a child's life, that brain gets developed then. Those children who are going hungry represent a tremendous loss for the future. And so I also want to bring a sense of urgency to the conversations that we're going to have here today, especially as the panelists come and talk about agriculture and what needs to transform in Africa's agriculture sector. We know right now, as I'm saying, you cannot have a renaissance without innovation. We know right now we're not where we need to be as a continent when it comes to innovation. We know that we're producing way fewer doctorates. Our Vice Chancellor is here. She will ascertain. We are producing way fewer doctorates than we need to drive the innovation agenda for this continent. We're not training enough scientists. We're not training enough researchers. We're lagging behind on that knowledge production. We know that we're not publishing, and publication, for better or for worse, is the ways in which we put our knowledge up for consumption on the global marketplace. And when we don't publish, when our researchers don't publish, that means African voices less heard on the global stage. That's a problem that we really need to address. We know that women are also lagging behind in that knowledge production. When you look at WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and their data, we know that women are in less than 1/3 of patents. Less than 1/3 of patents that are issued globally. We don't have the data on what's happening in Africa, but how do you think we're doing? Perhaps South African women are getting and holding patents at par with men, maybe? Look at you. You forget who you are, South Africa. If you guys can't figure it out, with all the resources here. Anyway, it's all good-natured jesting. We know that we're lagging behind. And during my time at Award, the 7 years that I ran African Women in Agricultural Research and Development, we actually tracked the data on where we're losing women scientists in the agricultural space. And I didn't bring the slide today, but we know that women drop off as they progress in their careers, so that whereas we were starting off with women at about 34% of undergraduate degrees in agricultural scientists, by the time it came to leadership, we were less than 7% of who were sitting at tables making decisions and allocating resources on where agricultural research priorities are going to be for the continent. And so we know that women are not where we need to be. Now, I've spent a lot of time trying to think about that and trying to figure out What happened? What happened? One of the places that I've spent some time thinking about, and this is, there's an interesting literature that I don't think we talk about often, but I want to start looking at moments where Africa collided with the West in that moment of colonialism. And one of my goals for today is to provoke you, right? So hopefully at least half of you walk out going, I don't think she's right, but at least, you'll have listened to the idea. So I'm curious whether you think this hypothesis is right. I want to argue that there has been an impact in the legacy of colonialism on this continent that contributes greatly to why and where women lag behind when it comes to research and innovation. I haven't even explained. Maybe I have a bogus. What if it's a bogus argument? Wait, hear me out. Maybe it's a bogus argument, but I think there's something here. Some of you might have read this book. If you haven't, I highly recommend it. Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. An absolutely seminal piece of work. And what he reminds us in that piece of work is that the moment Europe meets Africa in that colonizing moment, it's not like Africans were sitting just chillaxing, doing nothing. We were innovators. We actually, and when you look at the historical records, African cities were much more organized, much further ahead, much more civilized places to live than Europe, who were busy throwing poop out the window in the morning from the chamber pot. No, seriously, like, facts. So where did the rain start to beat us? How did, at minimum we were this, some would argue Africa was actually doing way better. At what point did the scales tip? And my argument is the scales tipped when we forgot ourselves and took the colonizers' truth to be our truth. And I've been thinking particularly on the question of women and women's lives. There's a stranger's truth that we took on that we haven't yet shaken. And there's many things we've shaken off. Here I am in South Africa in 1994. South Africans showed the world what it looks like to fight for and get freedom. We don't ever forget that, right? But there's certain things that we took that we haven't shaken yet. And I think, and I want to argue, that's where the rain is beating us when it comes to women and innovation, and even agricultural production, and why we continue having children go hungry on this continent. Here's the thing. Those of you whose great-grandmothers grew up on this continent, do you believe that your great-grandmother sat at home all day doing nothing? I would posture that pre-colonial African women had the freedoms to move, to act, to trade, to build wealth. And there's a rupture that happens at that colonial moment where we as Africans adopt Victorian mores. That it is in Victorian England where women were too delicate, corseted up, could barely breathe, that they had to, y'all know, right? That they had to sit in the house because, I mean, a stiff wind collapse. That was not your great-grandmother. That was not your great-grandmother. So the rain began to beat us the moment we actually, and the Victorian setup was women belonged in the kitchen. What's the kitchen? The kitchen is the private sphere. And men belonged in the public sphere. Now, what happens in the public sphere and what happens in the private sphere? In the private sphere is the kitchen. It's the arena of production and reproduction. The public sphere is the sphere of trade. It's the sphere of commerce. It's the sphere of wealth building. Now, you Africans, let me ask you. So, you take your women who used to trade, your women who used to grow food, create crafts, pack them into baskets on their shoulders, and cross countries. Cross-border trade. Today we're here running courses for women in agribusiness, as if it's a new thing. Look at what you forgot. Look at what you forgot. Your great-grandmother was a massive agribusiness trader. How did we lose that? And I argue it is in losing that we're in the situation where our children tonight are going hungry. We forgot ourselves. We agreed to build societies. And both men and women, African men and women, have entered this agreement. And we need to enter into an agreement. We're going to flip this. We agreed to build societies in the image of the colonial masters, where we today want to keep our women in the private sphere. We want to police how they dress. We want to police their skirt, the length of their skirts. We want to police, are they attached to a man or not? Are they married or not? And that's how we're going to measure the worth of women. That dynamic is the dynamic, I would argue, we need to get over if we're actually going to unlock the innovation imperative and the agricultural production and food security imperative. It's actually that simple. We cannot keep maintaining a dynamic that was never ours. We learned it, we can unlearn it. We built it, we can unbuild it. Our Vice Chancellor told us, what are we unlearning? I would argue that dynamic of relegating women. When you look at this continent, agriculture, a majority of the women on this continent are engaged in agricultural production. Agriculture employs about 80% of the population of most of our countries, continent-wide. Yet agriculture only produces 34% of our GDP. So we have locked our women, the women of this continent, in the most economically unproductive sector. That dynamic is the dynamic that we need to unlearn. Okay, there's a great concept that the Ghanaians have of Sankofa. I don't know if anyone has heard of it. And Sankofa is basically, it's symbolized by a bird that's facing back. And the idea of Sankofa is to go back and get what was lost. And so I really want to urge us, if we're serious about this innovation imperative, that we as Africans need to go back and get what was lost and stop continuing to build societies that our ancestors wouldn't recognize, that your great-grandfather himself wouldn't recognize. Okay, so that was one half of the provocation that I had. I have a second half that I will try and do faster. I've talked about Sankofa, going back. So we get back what was lost. What's the way forward? And here I'm actually optimistic for us as a continent. And the thing that drives my optimism is around ideas of what science is and what innovation is on this continent are actually relatively new. I like to argue that we're working on this continent with wet concrete. The best thing about wet concrete is it can be molded. It can be shaped. We actually have an opportunity on this continent to mold and shape ideas of science that fit and suit us, that feed the imperative for an African Renaissance. UNISTA is 150 years old. Cambridge is, 800 years old? More than that. And when I ran a ward, I used to say this to European compatriots, because they'd be, oh, African women are so oppressed. First off, the ways in which African women, because our oppression in this particular iteration of patriarchy is actually relatively new. We actually still have that ancestral DNA that knows how to get out of this mess. This one here is actually new. The one in Europe has been there for a while, right? If you're looking at a 1,000-year-old university that has excluded women up until the 60s or 70s, that concrete is set and cured. They have to hammer and chisel and actually demolish it. We here have the opportunity to build right from the beginning. 150 years. And there's so many other much younger universities. So many other much younger, much newer learning institutions. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited when I look at the work that the NRF, the ARC are doing. I'm excited that Bongi's here. I mean, this woman is legendary. The fact that you existed, that you took the role that you did, the first black woman, I believe, first black person, first black woman to run the ARC, right? The Department of Agriculture, not even the ARC. Sorry, my bad. The Department of Agriculture in here, South Africa. What's this? Sorry, okay. I need to hurry up. Anyway. When I look, and this is where, again, I keep coming back to you are South Africa. Don't forget who you are for the rest of the continent. The progress you have made and can make, the changes that you in South Africa show all the rest of us are possible, that stuff's inspiring. Don't forget that. But even my saying that is to encourage you to keep going and to push forward. You're working with even wetter concrete in 1994 than those of us, for example, in Kenya. I'm Kenyan, 1963. Like, our concrete is more cured than yours. So please don't miss the opportunity to build different and build now. I want to shift in closing to actually talking to the women in the room. It's International Women's Day. And even as we're talking about the African Renaissance, I want to just pause and reflect on a question of, for us as women, what is our work as women? I've talked about institutions and society and what needs to change in society. What's our work? What about us as women? And I want to challenge us that we cannot be the innovators that we're called to be if we don't take the time to nurture ourselves as individuals. And here I want to, it's a bit of a strange thing to say in a speech like this, but it's what's been on my mind and what I've been reflecting on. I'm on a personal journey, just personal leadership growth journey, and I hope you are too. And I've been thinking a lot about this concept of a meaningful mission, that all of us are put on this planet for a purpose. And all of us, it's upon all of us to identify our meaningful missions. And if we're lucky, each of your meaningful missions contributes to the African Renaissance that President Mbeki invoked and invokes for us. So then my challenge, I have a series of challenges for the women as we celebrate the women in the room. In what ways are you uplifting others? In what ways are you nurturing yourself? But also in what ways are you uplifting others? And this is going to be a bit of a tangent, excuse me, but I swear it's relevant. There's this thing I keep hearing and it drives me nuts. Oh, women are their own worst enemies. Have you heard that? I hate that phrase. I hate that phrase. Because words are powerful. What we speak becomes. We build worlds with our mouth, with our utterances. And I want to challenge every woman in this room to never, ever utter that phrase. Oh, women are their own worst enemies. We women are our own worst enemies. And especially never, ever say it when there's a young woman in the room. Yes. These young ones here, we need to build a world where they know they can expect full-fledged support from other women. The utterances of our mouths matter. And that then comes to the other challenge I want to throw out to the sisters in the room. In what ways are you creating the kinds of community of women ready for a renaissance? How are you nurturing yourself? How are you nurturing others? And how are you creating community? And back to the things that we as Africans lost in the colonial moment, we know as Africans, we speak community fluently. But we get to moments where we forget that, and we lose that. And so I want to challenge us, especially for women, in what ways are you creating community? The Vice Chancellor challenged us. What are you learning? What are you unlearning? For you as an individuals. And the Bible says God's mercies are new every day. That was a reflection. I want to close with this reflection. That was a reflection that I had when I thought about Renaissance, rebirth. You get a fresh set, unused package of new mercies every day. That is the currency of rebirth. That is the currency of a renaissance. For us as individuals, and for us as communities, and for us as societies. I worry oftentimes we have conversations at a very macro policy level, and we leave out that macro policy level is actually constituted by us as individuals. And if we are not healthy as individuals, we can't talk about a healthy society, a healthy community. And so, to the women in the room, how's your nutrition? Are you moving your body? What's your morning routine? What's your nighttime routine? How are you taking care of you? And taking, I'm gonna misquote, is it Audre Lorde? No, it's not Audre Lorde, I'm gonna forget who it is, who says taking care of me is a revolutionary act. It's a feminine, who is it? Is it? It's Audre Lorde. Taking care of, it's a particular, it's like self-care is an act of revolution. It's Audre Lorde. Oh, I got it right. But we cannot talk about our renaissance if that renaissance doesn't start from women as individuals hydrating and moisturizing. Literally. That basic, that simple. Hydrating, moisturizing. That basic, that simple. But that is an act of revolution because self-love is also a big piece of what's needed to unlock, to go back and get what was lost. Because we lost it because we were taught to not love ourselves. That's why self-love is revolutionary. We have built and adopted other people's beliefs about where women belong because we didn't love ourselves. These things are interconnected. I wish I could have done a better job of like, but I hope you're seeing how the big picture and your hydrating are interconnected. There can be no revolution if we're ashy.